Hi everybody, can you see me? Can you hear me? Do let me know when we are visible to you all. A 10 centimetre diameter spine, that's enormous. Fantastic, thank you Tish, I'm glad that you confirmed that you can see and hear me. Okay, hello there Dawn. Hi Leslie. Carolyn Bowie, hi, how are you? And Cheryl, Catherine M, and Sarah Painter, Triest. Thank you for your, hope you enjoyed your little Humphrey message. Susan, hi, Lethargy, hi. Good, perfect picture and sound, that's what I'd like to hear. Let's just skip back, see who else is on that we can see. Nikki Shaw, hello Nikki, how are you? Nice to see you back. And Dawn said hello to, I think. Sorry, you're getting a big fingergram there, aren't you? Like, yes, I'm talking to you. So this is scrolling through the chat in case you're wondering. I'm not trying to finger you all. That sounds awful to finger, but point the finger. She was a better. Yes, I'm talking to you. You pay attention now. That's quite good. That works quite well, doesn't it? Yeah, I shall keep that in. Hi MB. Hi Ronnie. Hi Laurel. Laurel's Happy Kitchen. And what can we hope for to have from Laurel's Happy Kitchen today? Natalie M. Going to watch the video later. I see. Like that, is it? Very good. Have a good swim. We'll see you later. And husband, like to have a tour you can watch live. Oh, well, hopefully we will live up to the expectations then. It's going to be a long one today because of the locations. Well, we'll talk about it in a minute when we go live properly, but they haven't thought about poor tour guides when they planned it. Tofu pumpkin pie. Wow, that sounds interesting. That does sound interesting. I'm just trying to think of the kind of texture. I'm thinking, obviously, the pumpkin very kind of soft. Just trying to get in my head how the pumpkin does the tofu remain sort of fairly firm, Laurel, within that, or do you kind of mash up the tofu so it's got that kind of same sort of smoothish consistency as the pumpkin? Pauline, hello there from Ontario. Always a pleasure to have you on. And you may be able to hear in the background the Minster bells are chiming, which is York's way of saying get on with it, young man. So good afternoon, good evening, welcome wherever you are. You're joining me here today in York. And this is the second part of a tour that started last week, The Ghost in the City, which is now an annual event and supported by York BID, Business Improvement District, Visit York and various kind of luminaries, who all do a fantastic job of bringing a really kind of special form of art to the city. Now, most of the, or a good deal of them, are located in the gardens, where we were last week. I'm going to pop in to see one or two that we missed last week. But today is a much bigger task, because today we're looking at the ghosts in the city. So they are somewhat spread about, and they've given very little consideration to poor tour guides that will work out a route to bring it all to you. But I think I've just about managed to do that. I don't know where some of these are, so we're kind of discovering them together. And as ever, I'm not working off a narrative that's been provided by the artist. I'm simply giving you my interpretation. What's clear is that this art installation is to reflect the wealth and the myriad of history in the city, referencing famous figures, certain periods and so forth. So I'll just kind of give you my take upon that. Hello, Robin. And that may well be something that the artist would agree with, or maybe something they would say, no, actually, it was completely different. So I'm not claiming to speak on behalf of the artwork, simply to share with you my take on it. And I think it's a really wonderful edition. It's the third year here in York. And long may it continue. And I think we're now up to 39 sculptures. It was about 20, then about 30, now almost 40. So high rev dot. So it's going up every year. And I think it's here to stay. It works fantastically well. So without further ado, we're going to walk on now. So for those that just always like to know where they are in York, we are on Grape Lane. We're about to enter into Coffee Yard and go into the area, of course, of Barley Hall. So let us switch over the camera. Hello, Anne. And off we'll go, and we'll go and find our first sculpture. So this is one you may have seen last year, but obviously it's the first time we're showing it this year. And sadly, Barley Hall is a little bit boarded up with scaffolding, but nonetheless we still get a good, clear vista of the first of our ghosts. And I can't quite work out what the relationship between this ghost is and the city, because it is widely remarked that what we're seeing up here is Juliet, as in Romeo and Juliet. One of history's most famous heroines, tragic heroines, is it? How we describe her? But that, we're told, is what's being portrayed up on the balcony. Let me just give you kind of a bit of zoom because we can't get right up there. Give me some zoom. Some days the zoom works better than others. We may well be. Here we are. So those of you that are, of course, familiar, maybe studied in school, I'm sure, will remember that Juliet is actually a teenager. I'm not really sure this is a teenager we're looking at, but let's suspend disbelief somewhat. And of course, in this scene, it starts with kind of Romeo creeping up to Juliet's balcony. And of course, the trouble with Romeo and Juliet is that they're kind of ill-starred lovers, aren't they? The Montagues and the Capulets. And so Romeo kind of bounds up, doesn't he? What yonder light breaks through the window? Is it something along those lines? And we start off with a kind of Romeo monologue, who isn't aware Juliet's there. He then spots Juliet, but he hides. She starts talking to him. And she speculates, doesn't she, on the nature of identity. One of those famous lines is, you know, I'll fluff it up, but it's the what is a rose by another name which smells sweet, yeah? And what she's talking about, she says, wherefore art thou Romeo? Which for years I always thought was, where's Romeo? Which kind of makes sense because she's looking from the balcony. She's not saying that at all. She's going, why are you Romeo Montague? Because she's Juliet Capulet, and that causes enormous problems. You maybe a West Side Story was kind of based on the kind of same sort of plot line. So I'm not quite sure what the link is to York, other than the fact of the sort of balcony. Let me just bring it back into sort of shape now. And it may be they just felt that it was so sort of redolent of the vibe of Juliet's balcony that they kind of shoehorned it in. One day I'll kind of come up with a reason as to why we should have Juliet Capulet as part of the Ghosts of York. Thus far, I haven't kind of come up with a reason for that, but that's great. We'd have to understand everything to appreciate it. And peeping Tom from the inside, she is looking out at us. I say she looks very forlorn, but nonetheless it's a striking image. And of course the setting is second to none. So I think we'll just forgive a slight transgression on kind of York's history and just accept that that Juliet Capulet, of Shakespearean fame, is a welcome addition to this year's Ghosts in the Garden Trail. So onwards, upwards, sideways, downwards. We've got a lot of mileage to cover today. Peeping Tom from the outside, I really like that. Like a prisoner trying to escape. You know, she's trapped, and of course that is so much, isn't it, of the vibe of Romeo and Juliet is being trapped by identity, by kind of history. And, you know, it's an issue that doesn't really kind of go away, does it, in contemporary politics? What are we talking about in Britain right now? Multiculturalism, identity, all these kind of elements never really go away. Can we transcend who we're born to be and become whoever we need to be to kind of fulfill ourselves to the kind of eternal question that is posed? Getting a bit philosophical already. We're only 5 minutes in, and already I'm off on philosophical whimsies, which I'll try and rein in for for the benefit of those. So, what was that building called, asked Cheryl? That was Barley Hall. So, Barley Hall is a reconstructed medieval townhouse in York. It dates from the early parts of the 14th, 15th century rather, and was at various times and the property of the church. It was rented out to Sir William Schnorshall. It was owned by the abbot of Newham Priory. So it's had a kind of variety of kind of guises, and it fallen into kind of dilapidation by the mid-80s, and they're just going to pull it all down as part of the kind of clearance and development of the area. And when they did so, at that point they discovered that actually behind it there was this substantial framework of a medieval building. And so that was kind of fully restored, and thus we now have Barley Hall, which is a fantastic opportunity to see life in the 14th, 15th century York, the latter end of the kind of medieval period, how people lived. It's highly recommended if you're here in York. So we're progressing down Stonegate, and we're heading towards the Judge's Lodgings. And I must confess I haven't actually spotted where this next ghost is. I know it's located there, so we shall have to do a degree of keep 'em peeled. I've got a good set of extra eyes. There's a good number of you on. So if you all help me out here when we come around the corner to Judge's Lodgings, we'll see what we can see and then respond on that basis. But we've got quite a lot of ground to cover today, so we'll go a bit of a lick. So in front of us, the Mansion House of York, of course, and the first purpose-built political residence anywhere in the UK, even older than London's Mansion House. But I think as we kind of go round, we'll perhaps speculate a little on that broader theme of ghosts. not necessarily simply the spectral variety with the kind of jump scares, but thinking about those that have lived here before. We can look at a building such as the Mansion House, and it's not difficult for us to think about the Lord Mayors that have lived there. Particularly if we see a list, centuries and names, it all kind of comes into focus. But of course you don't need grand buildings of history. Wherever you are, wherever you live, somebody was there before you. And to what degree does landscape have memory? To what degree does those that have settled in buildings, in locations, leave behind an essence of them? Or is it simply when they've gone and it's your turn, it's all about you, and then it kind of moves on? I don't know. It's the interesting sort of question is to what degree are the Romans still here in York? Are they still kind of present and correct? Interesting question. So here is the judge's lodgings, and somewhere round about here, here we are. Now hopefully we won't get kind of kicked out for doing this, but if we just go up what we can see, and I hadn't seen this before, this is fabulous, is a justice. So we've got these wonderful Palladian steps we can see here. A very imposing figure you can see there with his gavel. Isn't it wonderful, his wig? Isn't that fabulous? And scroll there. So there he is, about to pronounce judgment upon no doubt some unfortunate soul. Or maybe it could be a legal writ, couldn't it? So it could be a civil case. But one gets the impression that somebody's doom is about to be their fate is about to be sealed. It's wonderful here outside Judges' Lodgings, purpose-built residence of judges here in York now. A wonderful hotel, restaurant, and bar. What a fantastic addition to that. Is no longer, that's brand new for this year. I hadn't seen that. Isn't that just a fabulous addition? I absolutely love it. And for those that didn't join in on the tour last week, haven't seen these before, they are made of a metal. And the metal is chicken wire. It's kind of twisted wire. And they give a certain shape and a texture. More important, they capture light. And it is a fantastical sight, because obviously as we move round a sculpture, what we may kind of get a sense is that what at first looks to be solid is in fact kind of see-through. And so we get a very, very different feel as we move close in and far away. The closer in we come, the less definition we see. As we pan back, we seem to get a fuller sense. And of course that full sort of spectral presence. So I think he is fabulous. One of my favourites. Hadn't seen him before, didn't know what to expect, but that is absolutely wonderful. I think the gavel might be slightly on the long side. I was trying to hammer in a tent pole rather than give justice, but putting that to one side, I think that is a wholly wonderful and extremely welcome addition to the Go Show. I like that a lot. So we've got two kind of judges' residences in York. Judges' Court Hotel, not too far away from here, and the Judges' Lodgings. And this of course relates to the circuit when judges would come and move around. So these judges were in the Northern Circuit, and what that would mean is that felons were caught, were put in prison, generally in York, if they committed a serious offence, for all major kind of felonies across the north of England. And the judges would arrive, and the assize courts would be held, and you'd be found guilty or not guilty. But of course, the era that we're looking at here, the 17th century, was the era where there was somewhere in the region of 150 crimes that could result in execution. So you really were on a sticky wicket if you were languishing in a jail cell, awaiting the arrival of a judge to pronounce on your fate. Court cases typically range from 2 to maybe 4 hours for capital crimes. Dick Turpin, famously, his trial lasted all of 4 hours. So justice was dispensed pretty quickly. It was dispensed with malice aforethought, and basically, unless you had the wherewithal to either bribe the jailer to allow you to escape, or you could bung a pretty hefty bribe in, it was very, very unlikely you'd be able to act as anything like what you might call a contemporary defence. If you'd been locked up, chances are your fate was already seal. So we're going to the gardens, and we saw most of the sculptures here last week. So I'm not going to sort of dwell and sort of show you them all over again. I've got a YouTube video up that allows you to watch the previous tour, if you so wish. But obviously we're going to walk past one or two, because there was a couple, and I've found one of them so far. I'm hoping as we kind of walk along that looking at other people, what they're looking at, might help us to spot what we're missing. But I don't know if you remember last week, we were looking for the Peacock. And I've had a clue from a photograph I saw on social media during the week. So I now think I know roughly where the Peacock resides. So we're going to go hunting for the Peacock. We were talking earlier about felons. So as we go past, another opportunity to see the legendary highwayman here, Dick Turpin. Of course, executed here in York in April 1739, portrayed here, of course, famously with his horse. But as we discussed last time around, that story is apocryphal. There was no ride from York, or at least the ride from York didn't involve Dick Turpin. It was a chap called John Swiftnick Nevison. But Dick Turpin gets the star billing, and so we can safely assume that rather than Nevison or Claude Duval, it is Dick Turpin's links, of course, with York that see him as the one portrayed. Can we see his face? I couldn't, if you're talking about Dick Turpin, I can't get any closer because of the rope. Talking about the judge, I'd have had to kind of hang over the front, and that's the sort of hotel lobby, so that wasn't kind of great. So, Starlings we live at, absolutely. So there we have Dick Turpin. Again, wonderfully kind of portrayed his little purse about his waist there. And even looking now, with the light different as it was last week, I'm seeing details that I hadn't. I think as we kind of spoke about last time around, if you haven't seen it, is how much the ambient conditions impact upon the way we can appreciate and view these. So different light conditions give us different experiences, as does, of course, moving in proximity, moving around. We're going to see things differently. Sometimes we can see things kind of clear on and all the detail appears to disappear. But then we come to the other side, and actually suddenly the profile comes into clarity, and we can see his leg is weirdly turned in. It looks like he needs a wee. He's squeezing his bladder, but maybe that's just the excitement of doing a daring raid. Triggers on the weapons. You can see the triggers on the weapons, can't you? Absolutely. So anyway, let's go and have a look for the Peacock, because I think it resides somewhere in this region down here. I'm going to have a look at the astronomer as we go past. So what's kind of nice is this, because there's now so many of these, it makes for a kind of really engaging trail. There's so much to see. But annoyingly, there's a couple that I haven't found yet. There's a little squirrel somewhere on a tree. I think there's a cat. So I'm quite literally looking as we go. So extra bit of bonus content again as we're walking down that direction. Is Thomas Cook, not he of the travel agents, but rather a very influential astronomer who was involved in the design and manufacture of a new style of telescope which aided dramatically our ability to kind of map the night sky. So here he is on York's Gardens Observatory. This actually is a astronomy kind of research centre in the gardens, and so appropriately York's second most important astronomer. No picture. Don't they publish up? Well, they publish a map of the locations where you can find them, but not, Elizabeth, actually within that whereabouts in the garden. So it'll simply say museum gardens or, kind of a library lawn. So I kind of know where to go, but not where to find them within that. And that's the whole kind of point. Is we hunt ghosts, don't we? Ghost hunting, all that. So I think that's just sort of part and parcel of the allure of this particular activity. Is you have to seek them out. Your patience and your endeavour is rewarded, which seems like a bad metaphor for life, doesn't it? At the end of the day, seek and ye shall find. All that, isn't it? So what I was hoping to do this week is have plenty of time to go searching them all out, so I could sort of go just sort of directly know where they are. Things just happen during the week, all manner of things change, and so it's not quite been possible. But nonetheless, I've got a broad idea kind of where we're going and covering off. It's a nice day. And so we're not in a rush, are we? I penciled in, I think, about 90 minutes, 75 minutes for this tour. So hopefully that will give us plenty adequate time. So the eagle-eyed amongst you will soon spot, look at the children running all down the hill. We are firstly by the river, so always a good reminder the museum gardens sort of work right the way kind of down to the riverside. We reach the home of the monastery, of course, certainly the source of water, so and also transport, bringing goods in, fishing, water, so of course building by the river. But to bring it to more into its recent history, if you'd have come here at any time in the 60s, the 70s and the 80s, you'd have noticed immediately the peculiar call of the peacocks. They'd been apparently a gift from the people of China, and I think there was about a dozen maybe in the gardens, and you couldn't visit the museum gardens without coming to appreciate the peacocks. The queue is always very long, let's say that shop. So I think it's very fitting and wonderful that the artist, it says to me this is an artist that has got a real strong sense of Yorkness, a kind of York identity, and understanding how the peacocks were a fundamental part of the York experience. And obviously York has got much to offer, probably a lot more now than when I was a kid, but the peacocks was something, you go to town, can we see the peacocks, can we see the peacocks? So you'd always want to come here. It was a reason to come to the gardens to see the peacocks. And of course the peacocks love nothing more than to get their plumage up. And it's always the men, it's the males. You don't have female peacocks, you have peahens, of course. So there's no female peacock. It's a good trivia question for you. And they love nothing more than this kind of show of kind of aggression, and also their kind of virility. Leslie, what happened to the peacocks? I think one by one they died off. I think there was a disease that carried off 2 or 3 at once, but then gradually they all kind of died of old age. Rev Dot remembers them, and I'm sure Rev Dot remember this as well. What's fantastic is, because obviously you saw the gateway that we walked into the gardens. So the peacocks were free to come and go as they please, and that's exactly what they did. And so there's a busy road right outside the entrance of the gardens, and at any given time during the day, one of the peacocks would simply go out and stroll out the gardens and go and stand in the middle of the road, often then putting its plumage up. And what would happen is the town would stop. Okay? Traffic would stop. The peacock would strut around, would do its stuff, making all these shrieking noises, okay? And probably fouling on the road just to kind of show ownership of this. And then when it's kind of good and ready, it'd turn away and go from whence it came. And York would then continue onwards. But there was something about the majesty of the peacock that we simply accepted that it was their divine right to interrupt us in any way we saw fit, whether it should be through their peculiar screeching noise, or indeed them wandering out into the roads and around. Magnificent animals, quite wonderful. There's no other birds quite like a peacock. I've actually got some of the peacock feathers from birds that were here that are still into. They went to the theatre. It's kind of amazing that nobody sought in any way to try and control the activities of the peacocks, and that I think is wonderful. It makes them a really kind of unique part. And so for those that know, those that remember, those that came as children, those that have been here for a long time, will remember they are such a part of the fabric of York that to have them here as this is absolutely bang on. So congratulations to the artists and everybody involved for thinking this installation needs a peacock. I 100% agree. I think they do a wonderful rendering, and it's absolutely my favourite. So sorry we missed that last time, but here we are back in the gardens to make up for that. But onwards, we've got time is against us if we're going to try and catch all these spots today. So the peacock, I hope you'll agree, was suitably wonderful. But let us now head up and we'll go and have a look for another notorious felon associated with York. Did peacock's good. Did we enjoy the peacock? Was that so? That's some good starts, haven't we? So who've had so far? We've had Juliet on her balcony. We have had the judge about to pronounce sentence on someone fortunate. And don't forget as well, it wasn't always a death sentence. It could be transportation. Those of you on the other side of the Atlantic, of course, our original place of transportation was the New World. It was the Americas. It was only after the war, the revolution, separation, independence of America, that of course we then focused upon Australia. Captain Cook was sent to secure Australia. It's basically a new place to put our felons. So it may well be that some of you on this tour, people you know, may be distantly related to people that stood and faced a judge such as that and saw their life change dramatically on being told they'd be spending the rest of their life in a foreign country. Should we go around with a second spy of the bear? Peacock was lovely, glad we enjoyed that. I'm just going to get a sip of water. Again, the bear we talked about last time, so watch that video to find out the details. But again, I would just say it is a delightful, thank you Lizzie, a delightful presentation. Again, brand new for 2023. And the bear, if you watch the video of last time, the first part of Ghost in the Gardens, you will hear the rather surprising and unlikely story as to why it is that there's a bear right the way through. Did they have the sculpture outside of the gardens last year too? Yes, Elizabeth. And we did 2 tours last time as well. So we are kind of repeating, if you like, the format. So, oops. So we're now going to go through the multangular tower, the corner of the Roman fortress here. Now, kind of right-hand side, we're going to go through the secret gate to enable us to go inside the Roman fortress. The beautiful part of the garden, I absolutely love this. So the ferns kind of run up the side of the historic walls. I say it so often, but we are so fortunate in York. It is a stunningly attractive city. Of course, much of it not so attractive, but this central core that I bring you to time and time again, I don't think everybody would ever tire of it, such as its variety, but also what's fabulous is it's so close, and that around every corner we find a surprise. But of course, our focus today isn't so much on the history and the architecture, it is what resides within. And so we're looking constantly for the ghosts. So ghost number 4 is almost upon us. Hello, Mark. Good to have you back. And it is a chap that I'm sure needs very little introduction. Suffice to say that he was born here in York in the year 1570. He was born into very good stock. Indeed, his grandfather had been the Lord Mayor of York. He was a solicitor. His father's solicitor too. And they were one of the most prominent Protestant families in York. And his father had the job of prosecuting Catholics. So it's somewhat surprising that this individual has become known as the probably most famous Catholic terrorist, freedom fighter, depending on how you want to call it, of all time. I talk, of course, of Mr. Guy Fawkes. So Guy Fawkes, born in York, 1570, baptised at Michael le Belfry, is so where is this? We're now in what we call the Library Gardens, the side of the Museum Gardens, and we are in the section of St Leonard's Hospital, the underground storage area of the medieval hospital. And I can completely understand why they've put him here, because in these vaulted areas, it very much brings to mind where Guy Fawkes was captured. In the cellars of the Houses of Parliament, the Palace of Westminster, of course down there with the intent of blowing up Parliament. Why did he do that? Well, join the tour on November the 5th to find out lots of details. But suffice to say, he had murder in mind. The cards were always there. I know they shouldn't be here, should they? But even if you weren't kind of sure who this was, of course, our bags of gunpowder. Well, Elizabeth, what I want you to do is in your diary, put it in November the 5th, and you will hear the story of Guy Fawkes and a bunch of York Catholics that almost changed history. But almost all of them are from York. Join that tour and you'll find out why. But isn't he wonderful? We had again a little whisker of a moustache. So again, an example of him coming up close, kind of disappears and move further back, and we start to get more shape, more structure. Trying to get the light right on this one. It's quite hard to capture. Ruffles on the collar, yeah. Yeah, so we've got classic sort of Elizabethan dress from his hat. Of course, rakish on a bow. Little goatee beard, moustache. Sash about his waist. Of course, carrying a cane. And his trousers going down. Little ribbons about his boots. So isn't he wonderful? So do come on the tour on the 5th of November in York. We're talking all about Guy Fawkes and the Gunpowder Plot. So little beard, little goatee beard. Do you know all started in York? Well, there you go, Elizabeth. You're in for a treat. It's a very interesting story indeed. This is Gauntlet. So we'll just move back a little bit, just so you can get in a sense. They are brilliant, aren't they, Mark? And of course, as I say, that they are termed the ghosts of York. But I don't think the intention is to try and scare anybody. I think it is thinking about the people that inhabited this city over a period of 2,000 years, the people that have shaped, that have coloured its stories, that have impacted, if you like, on the development, the narrative arc of York. Quite remarkable that we get figures so famous as people like Guy Fawkes. It's remarkable. That's York. You know, as George V famously said, the history of York is the history of England. It's so closely kind of wrapped into the story because for so long it was England's second city. It's the capital of the north, long before Leeds or Manchester. Leeds and Manchester were in fact villages when York was already the capital city of the Romans, the Vikings and the Normans. And largely, get a map out, you'll understand why, with our focus being on Europe, northwest Europe, all the way down to the Mediterranean, the Roman Empire. It was the eastern side of England that was very much the focus rather than the western side. That came later, of course, as the colonies developed and rich marketplaces emerged for goods to the Americas, sugar, tobacco, unfortunately people. The focus moved across to the western side, but right through the medieval era, it was about the eastern side of England. And actually, looking at our Minster, and a Minster, by the way, for those that don't know, is a kind of nickname. It's an Anglo-Saxon term meaning meeting place for pilgrims. People often say, what's the difference between a Minster and a cathedral? There isn't one. It is exactly that. It is a cathedral. It is St Peter's Cathedral in York. So the metropolitical Cathedral of St Peter at York, shortened to York Minster. Lots of visitors. Westminster, of course, most famously in London. So Minster isn't designation, it's got a name, affectation. But in terms of the pilgrims, the eastern side was the pilgrimage route. So if you trace down the map, the old kind of North Road of Britain, you will see it's on the eastern side, and that reflects the pilgrim's route. And that's where you find the major cathedrals of England, by and large. Starting in Durham, of course it's associated with St Cuthbert, Durham, York, Lincoln, Ely, Norwich, although it does Canterbury. It's the eastern spine is the pilgrimage route down through England. So meeting place of pilgrims, this was a major stop upon that route. So in terms of footsteps, those that have passed through, thinking about the ghosts of people, the pilgrims, the religious visitors, are a major part of that story. It's very musical today. I think it's the third or fourth kind of very amplified buskers, a bit of operatic sort of going on over there. I'm going to be honest, I think they do it too loud. That may be being a bit grumpy, but it's because I have to compete with voice against amplification, and it's kind of tough at times to do that. So my view is you sing just as well. Opera singers on stage don't have big microphones and amps, do they? They project. So if you're any good, you ought to be able to do that. You shouldn't need overly loud backing music and a microphone. But I'm perhaps out of step with what other people like. But as I say, I've got to speak louder and with a sore throat as a result of competing with buskers and over amplified. I agree. I don't think they should have amplifiers. I think acoustic guitars, brass instruments, there's lots of things that don't need And at the end of the day, you know, if you can command an audience, that's fantastic. You shouldn't sort of dictate that if you're sitting having a cup of coffee, that you've got to listen to the music of somebody else's choice. I don't think that's a way to do the public realm. It's something I've argued about with a variety of people. I argued about it, made that case fairly sort of strongly, but I'm in the minority and people believe that it adds colour to the city. But I think everything should be in balance. Interestingly, the Minster isn't in balance. We think about the Minster as being very much kind of symmetrical. It's slightly spoiled by the Chapped House, which sticks out. But even more so, it's not in balance because the north side is rather much higher than the south side. It's one of the great challenges in the medieval period of building was actually how do you get things to be the same height? And whilst there are sort of various yardsticks, we've got measurements, didn't we, on like Alaster and Hoot and Pagnell, it remained a considerable problem. And what we know is the north transept is about 20 feet higher than the south transept. And that's just the reality of the buildings, the kind of the way they did things. So not 20 inches rather, not 20 feet. So very big challenge. How do you build something this big and keep it all at the same level? And Dot agrees. I take you agreeing with the amplification. I think you know we all have to be able to enjoy the city on our own way, and not have somebody else's. I know to a degree I'm talking, so you could say that I'm disturbing someone's peace, but I'm walking along. I'm not static. I'm not sort of staying in the same place and kind of somebody's trying to read a book and think, oh, you should shut up. I'm moving and I'm not amplified. But I think when you sort of sit, put yourself in a square and then play loud music, then everybody has to cope with that. If they want to kind of sit and have a drink, they've got to listen to your music. I don't think that's on. But anyway, maybe that's me being old and grumpy. But as I say, I'm not in a power to change it, but I can moan about it. This is my bully pulpit, Dot. This is my pulpit. It's Sunday, and so today's theme is how annoying amplified buskers are. So here we are. Press control, absolutely. And the hearing's not so good and all this sort of stuff happens. So anyway, we're about to see our next ghosts, which is jolly exciting. And so often we come down here and the gates to the gardens are closed, which is always a shame because I love nothing more than bringing you inside the gates of the garden of the Treasurer's House in York. Of course, famously, the Treasurer's House in York was the home of the chap who was in charge of fundraising in the Minster. When William the Conqueror first came to York in the late 11th century, he realised the church's fortunes were in a complete mess, so he created the first role of treasurer. Now this building is later that 17th century, but nonetheless for the same sort of function. Now, if we just have a look on this side, I'm going to come around this side, so people are taking photos, try and keep out their way for a second, then we'll come in closer and they kind of got their photos. What we have on the lawn here is two Victorian figures, although it's very late Victorian. In fact, I would say by her dress it's actually verging on the Edwardian, given the kind of the fashions of the day. You know, we've got much less of a kind of bustle and much more kind of flow. We've got the puffed sleeves, the Edwardian era, and a large kind of hat. So she's very much kind of in the very end, the 1890s period, which is fine because what that would very much do is that would put it in the time zone of Frank Green. And Frank Green is a very, very significant figure in York's history, because he is the man who took on this property. This property was dilapidated. Beautiful as it is, it was a stunning wreck, a ruin. And whilst it was very easy as a kind of romantic to come along and view these buildings and think, my God, what a paradise we have here, the reality was that unless significant investment went into these buildings, they were going to collapse and they were going to fall away. And so consequently, it was incredibly important that individuals like Frank Green had the wherewithal to realise that putting in private wealth was the way to restore and create. So he created for himself a luxury home which ultimately then was donated to the National Trust. But it was the wealth of individuals that did this. It wasn't a kind of a York civic intervention. It was about individuals taking these wonderful buildings, transforming them, creating kind of modern residences, putting heat through them, getting them to work. The best way to look after old buildings is to use them. Buildings hate being left alone with water and coal, and damp and all these kind of things. So consequently, the very best thing you can do to an old city is make it workable in a modern context. And so Frank Green was absolutely at the forefront of that. And as such, he's a kind of really, really important figure here in York. So I think it's a lovely kind of rendering, but I think for those that know the fashion, say maybe 1880s, 1900s, very much turn of the century, face red heart shape. And so everything about this, I think, is very much saying it is related to Frank Green, because, as I say, we are at Frank Green's spiritual home, the Treasurer's House of York, which some of you may know was the place I got married 19 years ago. So next year is my 20th wedding anniversary, and it was held here. Wedding photographs just over there on those steps. Sadly, it rained. Buildings get lonely. They absolutely do to us. You have to live in buildings. It's sort of easy to kind of go, isn't it beautiful? And we're just going to preserve it in aspect. And the opposite is true. Of course, you need to ensure that the delicate elements of a building, aren't lost in the habitation. But the very best thing is for it to be heated, to be lit, to be ventilated, to be used. And in that way, as long as your sensible precautions are taken, then of course you need to be able to, the ghost needs company, don't they, to be able to haunt. So again, I think a lovely example here of how the light, the sort of mid-afternoon light here is capturing the light. It's kind of glistening. It's feeling very different. The gloves, they're little elegant, little puffed out. It's an absolute winner, isn't it? So let me just show you with their background. Now those people have kind of moved away. What a wonderful setting that is. Robin, they're absolutely amazing. You can't sort of get away from the craft. Putting aside the kind of concept, which is brilliant in itself, of kind of re-establishing a historical presence, particularly in the kind of key sites. It's the execution, as is so often the case with art, is it's not just the idea, is it, or the concept. It's how well it's actually executed. And I think you'd have to agree that this has been done spectacularly well. So there's people behind want to get photographs, so I think we'll move on. There's plenty more for us to see and quite a bit of distance to cover. But I'm delighted to be able to bring you the late Victorian Edwardian ghosts of the Treasurer's House at York. So let us now move on. We'll get out of the way so these folk can get their shots off, and on to the next appointment. More so than not looking at each other. Let me just get out of the way. Thanks. Not looking at each other. Oh, I say, were they? Was there sort of a backstory there, do you think, Ronnie? Was there a bit of a grudge going on there, do you think? That things weren't as harmonious as they might be. See, I hadn't picked up on that, and that's the interesting thing about this. There's something, now then, what's the word? When you can project your own take onto something, almost like it's not zeal, because that's something else, that's about being present, isn't it, but not influencing things. But there's something about your ability to kind of project your own sense of meaning or your own kind of emotional connection with what you're seeing, I think is entirely possible, because they are ultimately featureless. That as close as we get in, we can never actually discern feature or much by way of kind of personality. We get a certain degree of emotive qualities. They might appear pensive, or kind of thoughtful. Well, pensive is thoughtful, isn't it? Or sad or happy, or whatever. But beyond that, we can't penetrate, and perhaps that is the element of being a ghost. That there is something missing. That a presence, a bodily shape can be there, but actually the person has gone. If we're talking sort of spiritual terms, the soul, if you like, is that departed. And in some respects, I think that's probably what these ghosts bring to mind. They are the bodily reminders, but not the spiritual ones. So maybe that's what the ghosts are. It's what's not there rather than what is. Maybe that is the artwork. There's an artist called Rachel Whiteread. You might have heard of, a modern artist. Was kind of sort of part of the kind of Britpack of the 90s. And she sort of famously did things in resin, but she did the spaces in between. So she'd do a room, like a load of resin blocks, but it was the spaces inside. She'd do a cast of the space inside a cupboard, or the chimney breast from the inside, or the space underneath the table, or the space between the chair legs. So rather than it being a depiction of entities, it was emptiness. Does that kind of make sense? But yet then, because they were cast into these resin blocks, kind of various luminous colours, you created a room of kind of construction of what's not there. And to a degree, I think there's an element of that whilst they are human, they lack humanity. Does that make sense? Or am I getting simply too philosophical, which is often, I won't, particularly when I'm given the opportunity to wander around York and talk to you lot with flights of fancy. Perhaps I've ever with a co-host go, shut up, keep the story. But the thing is, there isn't a story. There is no single narrative about this, and that's what's going to be interesting to me, is We go from place to place, encountering people from different times, triggering different kind of thought patterns. Because it's not a linear narrative. It's not, so we're put Monk, I'm going to put the walls now to go around to our next ones. It's not a single linear narrative. We're not starting with the Romans or even kind of prior kind of Neolithic settlements and coming through the modern day. Each part of the city has its own history that runs through all the decades and all the centuries. So it's appropriate that at times we're talking about Romans, other times medieval, early modern in terms of kind of Guy Fawkes, is there isn't a fixed narrative and a fixed story from beginning to end, but rather different ways of thinking about history and the city. So I thought, spaces between spaces. Yeah, it's kind of interesting when you think about spaces, because they're the bits we don't look at, isn't it? And so much of art, really, I think, is teaching us how to look, how to see, and to encourage us to question what we're seeing and what we're not seeing. So, for instance, walking on the walls, what you can see, of course, is a walkway. What you might not see is it's a 19th century reconstruction of a medieval walkway. But that makes all the difference understanding that, because without it, you would think, isn't it incredibly well preserved? You can't believe they'd built something in the early part of the 14th century and it was still like this. And you'd be right not to believe it, because it isn't true. It didn't look like this. It was falling down. It was crumbling. But in the same way that Francis Green restored the Treasurer's House, that then set in train the inspiration to begin to transform the rest of the city. And whilst at first there was an enthusiasm to pull down the walls and get rid of them, ultimately it was the restoration vibe that ran through. So wherever we look now, we can see part of the Roman fortress is down below us. Yeah, it's such a small space. But I mean, that says more about modern cities than those medieval ones. The difference with York is the city centre hasn't much changed in its footprint since the medieval era, whereas Leslie, wonderful supporter of what we do, lives down in London. And London, of course, has sort of become stuck together in a million villages. It's got bigger and bigger and bigger, so central London just feels like it goes on forever. But in reality, the medieval part of London wouldn't have borne any relation to what we now think of as London. You know, the City of London and Westminster were separate cities. And so this is the Merchant Tailors Hall, by the way, the guild hall for the cloth workers. This will be in there next weekend during York Unlocked, so do join in, come see the interior. So the footprint of York can seem small and completely out of kilter with modern cities, but that's because it is a pretty authentic medieval city, and they weren't huge. So York in its heyday maybe had 15, perhaps 20,000 people tops living here. At that same time, that was comfortably the second largest city in the country. London, the large, will have had 100,000, so much bigger, but not the 8 million that we have today, a long, long way short of that fraction of today's kind of populations. So when we say that York is sort of small, it's because we're looking through the eyes of the modern city experience, rather than thinking about what is a medieval city. Most of the very cool, very cute medieval cities in Europe are similar to York. Dropping signal a little bit, so do stick with if this is disappearing, and I'll be back. I think we're back on now, so if you drop signal in the next few minutes, don't worry, through a dead spot. We'll be back up, I think, and seems to be a place in England, guided tours, Hagar Far. All of England's a great place to visit. Yeah, Robin, it is. I think there's a lot of variety here, and the good thing about coming to England is once you're here, it's not too far away from one place to another. So even though, say, myself and Ian, for instance, have very distinct patches, he covers what I call the heart of England, Cotswolds, Oxford, those sort of places. They're only like 3 hours drive away. They're not kind of like a long, long way away. It's just, you know, I wouldn't drive 3 hours to do a tour. It's an hour and a half, we could probably might to the limit, or 2 hours maybe, a little bit further, Lake District. So York, York, nice and central, but England is not a kind of big sort of country in that respect, and it's pretty well connected by road and by rail. So once you're here, if you're going to say, oh, I'm coming to UK for 2 weeks, you can cover an awful lot of ground. My advice is, anybody coming for 2 weeks, is don't spend too long in London. Everybody that comes to York after London, because generally the way they do it, So if I'd known how wonderful York is, I'd have spent a day or two less in London. I've heard it so many times over the years. But of course, London is what everyone wants to see. You know, Big Ben, Buckingham Palace, Change of the Guard, lots of stuff. The trouble with London is, because it's so big, you spend so long travelling, so much of your day is taken up whizzing from one side of London to the other. But that's not against London. London's fabulous. Of course, come and visit our capital city. But do take the opportunity to see more than London. Taking York, perhaps Stratford, Oxford, Bath, maybe we've got Hadrian's Wall, Stonehenge, and there is so much to choose from. And of course, then you've got Scotland, Edinburgh, Glasgow in the west, Loch Ness, Isles of Skye, and all the kind of wonderful things that Paul is showing us now. So I think what it does offer is kind of true variety, and that's fantastic. So much to see. So if you can afford 3 weeks rather than 2 weeks, that's probably the best way to do it. And then you don't have to compromise at all, do you? So we're coming up to our next installation, and that kind of bit on the walls there was the only way I could kind of make sense of the route in terms of kind of trying to think, how does one get from one place to another within a time frame that isn't kind of be on tour for 4 hours to do it all. So that's why. So today, by comparison to the last tour where everything was a lot closer together, slightly different feeling, different vibe, but I hope you're enjoying your time with me. St Cuthbert's Church, we've got St Cuthbert earlier, the patron saint in Durham, very, very significant early church saint. This is his church here in York. And we're about to visit St Anthony's Gardens, which we've been into once or twice, to St Cuthbert's House of Prayer. A very important 9th century English saint. So we're going to visit the garden, which we've been to before, and I believe there are 2 ghost sculptures in here. I haven't been this year to have a look, but I believe there are 2. And it relates to that. This is St Anthony's Hall, the building. We went there last year on York Unlocked. So again, we've been into this location. And St Anthony's Hall has been various things. Been a guild hall, but also was a school. The Blue Coat School, I believe, it started in the Tudor era. And so in this lovely, peaceful setting, I believe we are looking to find both a master and a student. And these schools in the era weren't really the province of the wealthy. The wealthy would have home tutors. So of course, famously, the kings, wouldn't they, would have the whipping boy, because you couldn't punish a king. So they would have another student who was there to take the punishment, and the king would, the young king or prince rather, would feel guilty and mend his ways. That was the idea, at least. So for the very wealthy, they were tutored. So often schools were about educating orphans or children that for whatever reason were particularly bright, but simply didn't have the resources, the availability to kind of fund their education. And so they'd be taken, if you like, in hand and educated. And this school figure here is, I believe, given his look, his mutton chops, I'm guessing he's Victorian. He reminds me of a politician by the name of Rhodes Boyson. You're aware of him. He used to be breaking on sort of TV in the 70s and 80s. He was a former head teacher, conservative politician, and he was very much into the idea of the way to keep people in line was not through trying to understand them, but by burnishing the stick. He does indeed mark a regular Rhodes Boyson type. We're going to keep schoolboys in line, don't spare the rod. So he's very much cut of that ilk. So whatever situation he's walking to rather purposefully, we see him there, his bow tie. He thinks whatever the answer is, I'm well equipped with my sturdy cane here to deal with whatever surprises come. And I'm like, hello, Marianne. And so he's got the traditional mortarboard on. So schooling was often charitable long before there was state education. That's not really until the 1870s in this country, where everybody was then given a kind of education, at least to primary school age. Education was very much on the charity end, often associated with the church. So initially training people to be able to read and write, to work in the church, because obviously you needed people to be literate to be able to do these kind of functions. So it was more of a skill to acquire for the workplace, for stewardship, to be able to count, to be able to record, to be able to report, to be able to write up, to chronicle, and so forth, rather than a belief that people on the whole should be educated. Of course, go back to the medieval era, and it was very, very rare. illiteracy was the norm. Everything was in Latin, you weren't able to read it or understand it. And so definitely Tom Brown's School Days, definitely got that kind of feeling about that. Or what's it was called in Nicholas Nickleby? Something Hall. I can't think of his name now, but awful, brutal, sadist teacher in Nicholas Nickleby and Charles Dickens that treats them all horrendously. So moving slightly to a different era now, we have a schoolboy. And so this Tudor young man, we see dressed in the fashions, with a hat, he's carrying around something of a pomade in his hand, probably a scented orange. And they did this, of course, to get rid of smells, but also they put scents, cloves and stuff, and heady sort of scents in the oranges. Try and keep away horrible pestilence and disease and the smell of the poor. But chances are this young man had been elevated from relatively modest circumstances and given an opportunity, given a scholarship, provided for to be educated, to be part of not necessarily the ruling classes, but rather the classes that ruled on their behalf. In other words, the civil service, the administrators, the stewards, those that were literate, that could count, that could write, that could record. It's within that clerical, educated class this young man has probably been elevated by way either of his connections, by way, who knows what enabled him, if you like, to make that step into it. But as I say, it was selected for very few people. They didn't need masses of people to do this job. They needed people they could trust. And so by taking them from children, they could shape, if you like, rather than employ somebody as an adult, taking them out of their class. It was far better to take a young child out of their class and then breed them into a caste, if you like, with a mindset, with a perspective, with a view that being laid upon them by the people around them, than it was to get adults to kind of change. So consequently, Flashman, absolutely, that definitely period. So whatever it is, this kid has probably won a lottery in life and has been moved up. But of course, as part of that, he would then be cut off from his peers. There'd be no way of going back. Once this person is educated and clean living in one of the big houses, they're expected to adopt the mantles, the behaviours, the attitudes of that class. And so it's like being airlifted out. There's no way back. But of course this was seen as, through education, to be a good thing, very positive, very helpful. But of course, most children didn't get that opportunity. But nonetheless, that's what this kind of school was in the era, was for educating poor children with money that was laid down by the wealthy and by the church. Let's move on, because we're already up against it for time. We may not get all the ghosts in today, which would be a shame. But so I think this is the gardener over here, who's great. He was last year. He was in by the art gallery, and so I got to see him back. I wondered where he was. Didn't know he was here. So it's lovely to see a man here putting the honest labour, digging in the soil. And you know, whenever we look at landscape, we look particularly at shaped landscape. You know, beds, terraces, whatever it may be. That's been done by obviously design, but also it's been done by labour. These are the people whose backs were put into shaping and creating space and kind of landscape that we look at and appreciate. So I think it's lovely that, that this kind of humble working man, hello Colin, is here to kind of remind us of that. Another of the ghosts of the past is looking around, is seeing beyond simply the beauty and thinking of the process of creation, of thinking of how does something come from being a flat landscape to being a terrace landscape. How do flower beds come into being? How do we have shrubs? Because somebody at some stage got in there, dug it out, planted them, tended them, looked after them for year after year until such time as it was well established. So it's lovely, I think, to have, for our consideration here, a gardener. So I'm rather like him. So I think we'll move on. St Anthony's Garden is definitely a place I'd recommend. If you come into York, it is very similar. I don't know if Leslie made it while she was here. You're right at the back of the wall, so you can sort of see this city walls from over there where we can walk past. And it's a lovely place of peace and solitude. And I think it's so important in this day and age where, you know, kind of life comes at us so fast that we're able to find places of solitude where we can stop, think, just take in, be in the moment, enjoy the plants and the flowers, And of course right now, enjoy as well, of course, the lovely ghost sculptures. So let me have a little look at my list and see where we're going to next. We are St Saviour. Right, I don't know what's going to be down here waiting for us. I know that we're heading towards St Saviour Gate, which is a lovely name, isn't it? So St Saviour Gate is our next destination, just around the corner, St Saviour's Place. So this is St Anthony's Garden. St Anthony's Hall is this building here. So much sort of modernised, but starts as a 14th century Guildhall. And we came here last year on York Unlocked, and York Unlocked is next weekend. So I'm planning to be out and about, getting into as many of these buildings as possible. So do join me next week for that on Saturday and Sunday. It'll be, I don't know exactly yet where we're going to be going, but I know it'll be worth seeing wherever we do, because we have such a plethora of great buildings here in York to enjoy. And I hope to be able to bring them as many as I can. So as I say, St Anthony's Hall, just where we're passing here, the Guild of St Anthony, dated from 1418. We have much to see. Time is already running short, and so let us. But we're going to be doing an hour already. Can you believe that? I've been gas bagging for an hour already, and still got a lot to see. But I say that's partly because of where they're placed. We were talking earlier about the spaces in between. So this tour really is an extension of that, isn't it? It's not simply showing you the ghost sculptures and thinking about that, where represent what bits of York history they might bring to mind, but rather the places and spaces in between that we encounter in trying to consume all of these wonderful sculptures across this second, or rather the second half of this tour, shall we say. And we haven't got all of them. I haven't yet found the squirrel. I think there's a cat that's annoyingly missing as well. So I don't know, but it may be. I don't know what's here at this church coming up on our left-hand side just a moment. So it may well be we see both of them then. If not, I'll scratch my head and I'll have to go looking for it. But a wonderful street in York, St Saviour Gate. We're quite near the Shambles now, in case there's a wondering kind of where we are in relation to something that you'd already know. So this is the Church of St Saviour that's about to come into view on your left-hand side, another of the medieval churches of York. And like quite a lot of them, disused, no longer in use as a Christian place of worship. It is now home of the archaeological centre, Dig, and in particular it's for children and young people to get in there, get their hands dirty, have a dig around and discover the sheer delight of being in the dirt, find all manner of interesting things. So somewhere around here we're told that there is a ghost sculpture. I've yet to locate something. Do you know, have you seen the ghost?
Yeah.
But somewhere around here, I'm told at Dig, there is a ghost. So I'm just looking up in the trees and around, so I'll just cross over and see what is what. If not, we'll just like pop in. Ah, here we are. So let's just go through there. So I can't get really close to this one, other than to say this is a Viking chap. And he's got a rather splendid warhammer at the bottom. He reminds you of Gimli the dwarf. Those that are familiar with the Lord of the Rings, Gimli, one of the Fellowship of the Ring, he has that kind of quality to him, a sort of stout, robust kind of character, somewhat kind of rotund around the waist, but looks like he could swing that axe in a heartbeat, and you'd find yourself poleaxed result. And so, of course, we're thinking now about the Viking element of history. And York, for 200 years, known as Jorvik, was, of course, the capital city of the Anglo-Scandinavian Empire. So entirely fitting that we have a Viking sculpture. Let me just try and if I get over here, so we can just come in, get a different vista of our Viking. It's a long, straggly beard, a Roman coffin behind him. Oh, and he's swaying in the wind, so it looks like he's acknowledging and nodding. But again, I don't know how much you can see. I'll give you a little bit of zoom there onto his face. He's got a rather expressive face, I think. Can you see sort of nose and kind of mouth in and amongst the facial hair? Do the Boys Hall, that was it. Yeah, Do the Boys Hall. Yes, that was it. That was Nicholas Nickleby. Thank you for reminding me of that. So yeah, fantastic. So I don't know any other Lord of the Rings people on, if they can see Gimli there, the dwarf. That's who he brings me to mind. So onwards, upwards. So as I say, the Vikings here in York came to the city by force, year 866. For fans of the TV show The Vikings, we'll be thrilled to know the three sons of Ragnar Lothbrok, Ubba, Halfdan and Ivor the Boneless, succeeded in conquering York in 866, then held it in the Battle of York in 867, and for the next 200 years, this was the last kingdom. So again, those that know their Bernard Cornwell, the Uhtred books will know it's the last part of these islands to actually become part of this nation of England. Who knows what ghosts get up to at night? Absolutely. Maybe they walk around at night. Obviously, we can't see. We don't know. Now, there's something happening at the Shambles. I think it's closed off at one end, so I may have to just do a bit of a U-turn to do this. I'm not quite sure. I think I know where the ghost is on the Shambles. And I think it's a good little story, if it's where I think it is. But we'll find out when we get there. So we're just by the famous Whatmer Gate, of course. Famous street, has the longest name, one of the shortest streets, and he runs from there to there. But we're not here to see Whatmer Gate today, but rather to use this alleyway to allow us to bypass a physical barrier which I believe is still in place that's going to stop us from coming down, or at least exiting the Shambles. I may be wrong, it may be done by now, but we've got the Church of St Crux here on our left-hand side, full medieval church that began to collapse in the Victorian era. We took it down and rebuilt that chapel using the stonework. But I think as we come around here, we will have sight, what a cutie, of a... Where is she? She's up here somewhere. There she is. So one of the things, the favourite stories that people love to talk about at the Shambles, of course, is how narrow the streets are. That this, of course, was a meat market, so this alley in the middle would have been running with the blood, the entrails, the byproducts of the butchery trade. But also this idea of people emptying their slop buckets out into the street on top of unwary passers-by. So it's fantastically suitable. The ghost sculpture here in the Shambles is a woman doing precisely that. So the unwary walking along is likely to have human waste deposited as part of their person. Now it's not quite as simple as that, because there would have been covers, like canvas kind of, what do you call them? Like kind of shades coming down in front of the shops. So chances are it would have rolled down them onto and dripping onto the meat in front. But no, it's not very nice, is it? And so there you go, you see a laced up bodice, which give you a little bit of zoom. So there she is, rather disinterested, not really giving a damn about who's actually passing below. All her view is she's got a bucket to empty, she's going to empty it. And of course, what this does is a sort of stark reminder, isn't it, of living in cities, is they were just so dirty. Human waste, animal waste everywhere, no clean water, all this waste running into the water courses that would then be used for drinking, feeding animals and so forth. So it's one of the major problems, isn't it, of cities in this period, before public health, for clean water, was of course contagion. So, the opposite footway, we can't get through, that's okay. So, wasn't too bad. So let's now head down towards the merchant. I'm going to get a drink of water because I am just chocolate. Okay, so chocolate. You're a chocolate junkie, yeah, Robin. You get that fast buzz. Isn't there all sorts of things that are said about kind of how it works with our sort of nervous system? It kind of gives us a kind of buzz. It lifts our mood somewhat. But of course, the sugar is it comes down again, doesn't it? You get sugar spikes. But anyway, so in front of us, the wonderful lantern tower of All Saints Pavement, as we now head down toward the Merchant Adventurers Hall. So another guild hall, like St Anthony's Hall. The guild halls, of course, were the homes of the guilds. The guilds were trade associations. They came together to formulate trade policy, everything from wages, apprenticeships, quality standards, and of course, doing deals, doing business. So long before we had municipal government, local government, that took responsibility for these things, you had the guilds. And the guilds were organised, we're going to find out again more about this next week when we go and visit the Merchant Tailors Hall on York Unlocked, what we call confraternities, religious brotherhoods, usually associated with one saint or another. And what they would do is they come together to pray, to do business, and to to basically have a nice time. So kind of a bit of a kind of business club, social hub, business centre, place of prayer, all rolled into one. And of course, being as York was fabulously wealthy at this time, as you can imagine, they did so in very high quality environments. So I'm hoping these gates are going to be open. It'll allow us to go down to the Merchant Adventurers Hall, because I believe again that there are 2 ghost sculptures in this area. The ghost will come out for chocolate. I suspect you're right in that respect, Elizabeth. So the wonderful gates with the crest of the company of the Merchant Adventurers welcome us. You can see here the sign for the ghosts in the gardens. Please not touch the ghosts. Sounds like good advice, doesn't it? So let us see what we can see, find whom we can find. I believe we were here last year. I think there is a ghost chocolate. Yeah, I think so. There's certainly ghost gin, various ghost associated products. So, and of course there's the Romans and Vikings and all that goes with a place like York. Let's just pause for each before we go ghost hunting and just take that in. What a splendid sight that is for us to feast our eyes upon on this Sunday. I say afternoon. It may not be afternoon where you are, but hopefully this is a rather nice way to be spending your Sunday. So we're coming down out onto the banks of the River Foss, and the Foss is one of York's 2 rivers. It's much the lesser of the 2, quite clearly, and rather smelly, often a lot of duckweed, and so it isn't somewhere I would choose to fish, or certainly if I was fishing I certainly wouldn't choose to eat what was coming out of it. But nonetheless, we can imagine that this figure here of the fisherman with his rod is perhaps brings to mind one of 2 things. It may be, of course, it is a reference to a time where we lived eating a lot more fish than we do now, so having fish for a source of food. But equally, it may be a reference to the beginnings of leisure time, which don't really kind of come on stream until the sort of second half of the 19th century, really the last 2 or 3 decades of the 19th century. We have the idea of time off, really. Previously, you'd have Sundays off in the medieval era to go to church to study the scriptures or to behave in a fashion that was appropriate to faith. But the idea of time off to enjoy yourself, pursuits, pastimes, whether it be fishing, watching football, going out for a stroll, that was a fairly sort of recent addition. It wasn't really until, particularly the sort of bank holiday acts, of the latter part of the 19th century that leisure really kind of came into the idea. So it may well be this reflection. It's a fairly modern picture, this. It doesn't feel to me to be a historic figure. It looks like somebody from his dress sense that he's definitely 20th century. So I think this is much more about leisure and pleasure than it is about eating fish for survival. And I say anybody that was prepared to eat fish from this kind of morass of duckweed, I think we're a very brave individual indeed. I really wouldn't kind of recommend it, but I may be wrong. Maybe it is about a relationship with fish as a food source. And certainly this area around here, we looked at the Vikings earlier, this was always all wharf lands. So an awful lot of fishing and activity by the waterside will kind of go on down here. So yeah, I like this one, Leslie, it's cool. And there's another one just over here. We have, not quite sure what's going on with this one, nothing to do with the Ghost of York, but a bird scarer perhaps, who knows what that is. But setting is beautiful. And this area, by the way, after it closed down, because it was closed down with the monasteries, this was a dispensary, a place where the poor could get medicines dispensed. And so I cannot but wonder whether this lady here, who is carrying a basket, whose dress I would say looks to be she's wearing a sort of cloth cap, so looks to be kind of a sort of peasanty, really, being brutally honest, in her dress. Everything is very, very simple in her kind of dressing garb. She doesn't have the frills at her collars we saw before, nothing fancy, there's no bows, she's got a purse there. But there is nothing other than, cloth bonnet. There is nothing fancy about her dress, which suggests that she is urban, probably poor. So it may be that this basket here, she's coming in to collect medicines, perhaps for an elderly or a sick relative, maybe her child. She's come here to the dispensary. So for 200 years, after St Leonard's Hospital closed in York, which we saw right at the beginning with Guy Fawkes in the hospital, after that was closed down because it closed down with the monasteries, there was no hospital here in York. So for 200 years, this was a voluntary dispensary. So this is where you come before the county hospital was built. This is where the poor could come and get medicines. So we don't know the story of this, but I would suspect, given the location and the dress it's referencing, that's how we're doing for time. We're just about 15 minutes just to cover off the last kind of 2 or 3. So let's have one last look at this maid before we, and very little by way of features as well, which again could be a commentary on the urban poor. They're the hardest for us to see with any clarity because they don't have the portraits painted, don't have their silhouettes done. Their lives are usually charted in, if we're lucky, lives, births and deaths. There's very little left behind, so again, it could be a commentary of the artist that actually the urban poor, or even the rural poor, are the most indistinct when it comes to kind of historical record. So we come into her and there's almost nothing that we can see other than we know that she exists. There's nothing about her demeanour that tells us who she is, what it might be. So let's leave behind these gardens and go in search of fresh prey. Doing pretty well, this route seems to be working well. I'm certainly putting in the miles, so any appreciation of the physical effort involved in this, the wear and tear on shoe leather, is most appreciated. I'm sorry, of course, I can't see mid-tour. For those that are leaving a contribution, I thank you in advance. And from time to time, I remember to send thank yous, but of course, there's always something that gets in the way. I think, oh God, must do that, and I forget. So my apologies to anybody who's left a contribution of late and I haven't said thank you as yet. I will get round to it. But in terms of running the collective on a day-to-day basis, that's quite a lot of my time as well as my own day job. And of course, being a dad and decorating and trying to write new tours. So things get bumped. If part of that is my response to your generosity, please forgive me. And I will do all that I can to make good on that. But in the meantime, let us continue on. There are a few more bits for us to see. Again, I don't know exactly where we're going to locate this, but I do know we're going to be down at Castle Mills Bridge. So we're heading out of York city centre now, so leaving behind Motion Adventurers, crossing the River Foss, and return back to give you an idea on location. The castle, we merge on our right hand side, just in a moment, just coming into view. Right now we're going to loop round with there. I need to put the links in the chat. I think, Leslie, at the top of the chat, the links for contributions are there, are they not? Or did I not do that? I thought I'd done that, but if I haven't, is it not at the top of the chat? Then London and North Wales. Then forgive me, but if of course you want to make a contribution but you're not able to, just do get in contact. I'll let you know how to do that. I normally put the links in the chat, but I may have forgotten today. As ever, we're trying to squeeze too much in. So we've got Spark over here on the left hand side, and you can see here no little political backwards toing and froing meant this kind of rather colourful temporary installation is largely boarded over now. There are people that simply can't outstand the thought of York having something a bit different. Thank you, Elizabeth. That is most generous and lovely, thank you. So it's sort of a source of tension, this Spark. It is a container park for new businesses to set up and take a low rent option, try and grow their business, and quite a few have gone on to run successful businesses. I can't see the beef. It's an area that needs redeveloping. Still, this side of the city is enormously needs redeveloping, but there are those for whom it is an aberration, who cannot see beyond the fact that it is a bunch of painted containers, cannot see the social value or communicating to young people and young entrepreneurs they're welcome in the city, would far sooner they have to fork out for very expensive premises in the city centre and of course jeopardise their fledgling businesses in doing so. Utterly daft if you ask me, but there we go. Now it's the strangest folk, as they say. So we're on Piccadilly in York. Not most attractive of streets. Again, an area that is being developed kind of piecemeal and really sort of could do with a master plan. However, there's a kind of example of a street that could have really done with a plan, but rather it's been done bit by bit. And so it's okay. I mean, I'm not going to be really mean about it. It's not without some value, certainly close to York. If you want to come and stay at the Holiday Inn there, you're very well located. But it lacks a coherence, to my mind, this particular street. And thank you. And as a result, you know, it ends up sort of slightly kind of underwhelming because we come out of York and we're so, you know, the embarrassment of riches and suddenly we come into a zone that feels unloved, uncared for, not really thought through, just a bit of, oh well, it'll do, if you want to put money into it, just let them, and worry about it later, and as a result it just feels bitty and kind of piecemeal. But thank you, Elizabeth, for pointing that out. So there's a range of ways to leave any contribution that you're able to, and I do appreciate it. I sincerely do. So we're coming around now to the Fishergate Postern, which we talked about a couple of tours back. We did the gateways of York. So again, if you're not already following me on YouTube, do subscribe, because that enables you to have a look at content that is from past tours. They might not stay up there forever. I may take stuff down, put stuff up, so it doesn't get too cluttered. So I do urge you to go in and have a look and enjoy some of the previous tours, because hopefully a lot of the themes and bits and pieces that I talk about actually make sense across the more of my tours that you watch, the more these kind of building blocks of history, the ideas about trade, about the economy, about people, about power, about the church, about history, about periods, about the Romans, the Vikings, the Normans, etc., will make sense, because I'm referencing the same stuff time after time, just using different buildings, different areas to illustrate the same points. So hopefully the more of them you watch, the more you'll feel a sense of not only that you now know York, which is fabulous, everyone should know York, but that also you've got a much broader and deeper understanding, but hopefully not by it being like a schoolroom and hard to digest, but rather just little bits and pieces that add together to a compendium of knowledge that you develop over time in order to give you a sense of knowing and understanding what's off here. So I think I can see something. I'm not entirely sure what it is that I can see, but oh yes I can. So we're here at a place called Castle Mills Bridge. So the castle, let's put this in context before I can zoom in and show you. So the Castle Museum, as it is now, was a prison, a series of prisons, and of course that was a very important function of prisons in the first place, of castles. They imprisoned your enemies, right? You won a battle, you took prisoners, put them in jail, and so forth, charged a ransom, often to get them out, or execute them. And the curtain wall, so that's sort of the light-coloured stone wall, dates from the early part of the 13th century, 1215, around about that period, is that wall. And in front of it, we have a mill building, much, much newer, 18th century. But during the period that this was a prison. And of course, this was about the production of food for the prisoners, and also to create a surplus, to earn money. Prisons were businesses. So of course, the prisoners, the trusted ones, we put to work in the mill. And so I don't know how well you can see, because the light isn't great and we're quite a way apart. But have a look underneath the YouTube with the description of the tour. I think it's there as well. But it may be remiss of me. But can you see what we've got here is a chap that is, over here, that is pulling on the rope, and he's lifting up a sack of grain to the upper floor. And the upper floor, of course, is where the grain is going to be stored before obviously being taken off to a mill. There's no windmill here, and of course that's what the windmills did. They were, of course, used to grind. So this is the preparation, obviously, ahead of milling. He's using a pulley to lift up. So it's pretty hard manual labour for this chap here, doing it by himself, lifting up what would have been traditionally a 16-stone bag of corn up to the first floor level to be stored, to keep it away, of course, from mice and from rodents and from those that would peck away and eat at the food, and keep it in darkness as well, because last thing you want is to see germinating. So it's all about the protection. So this is a reference, of course, to the prisoners, the life of the people here in the castle, many of whom, as I say, will be involved in work to produce the food necessary to feed the population. And often people, of course, had to pay to be in prison. We think of it being sort of a mandated thing, which of course it was, but you also had fees to pay, and jailers were self-employed, and so they would often look for prisoners that might have some value. So of course, for the jailer in York, when it was discovered they had none other than England's most wanted man, Mr. Richard Turpin, Dick Turpin for short, in his cells, well, of course, therein lay a business opportunity. Everybody wanted to feast their eyes upon this most famous felon who had, in effect, made the powers that be look ridiculous in a 2-year-long chase, during which period he was England's most wanted man. So when it was found that he was residing in a jail cell in York awaiting trial of horse theft, of course what that meant was there was a swift buck to be made by the gentry, paying a shilling to go in and see, spend time, talk to and meet this famous felon. Dick Turpin and the jailer went halves upon this deal, and it was sufficient for Dick Turpin to be able to afford a new suit of clothes for his day of execution, to provide clothes and outfits for 6 mourners to accompany him, and to send a substantial sum to his mistress. Even though he actually had a wife and a child, the money that he raised didn't go to them, but rather to his girlfriend. So a rotten rogue to the last. Dick Turpin perished on the end of a rope here in York, April 1739. And as I say, he was imprisoned here. So I don't know whether the archer is up there, because I know that there's meant to be an archer up on the walls of the tower, but that in winds it has been taken down. So all I could do is have a look, and if it's here, we'll see it. If it ain't, it ain't. But I'm doing my level best to bring you all the ghosts of York. So let us go and have a look. So I believe, if it's here, what we've got is an archer. So a guy with a bow and arrow, which of course was the go-to weapon of defence. Very, very good over distance, long before, of course, we had weaponry, guns, etc. Rifles, shoot over distance. The bow and arrow was, in the right hands, a tool of deadly accuracy. Of course, using long sprung bows, the projectiles could fly a great distance speed, and we sort of forget about the potency of bows and arrows. Think of it as a yesterday's instrument. If you think about medieval warfare, for instance, in the Battle of Agincourt, famously, we had somewhere in the region of 5,000 English archers that could shoot out 4 arrows a minute, which meant that for the French cavalry charging across the battlefield would have 20,000 arrows a minute raining down on them. Imagine the chaos, 20,000 arrows falling out of the sky. Doesn't have to be accurate, because the blanket coverage is just so wide, if you like. The odds of being hit and wounded are very substantial indeed. So I'm just walking around to see if we can see. As I say, I know that this one has been taken down because of problems with the wind. So whether he's up today or not, I promise you I just don't know. What I'll do is walk round and we will see if indeed an archer is to be found. If not, I'll try and find a picture for you, put it on Facebook so you can see it, because I have come across 1 or 2 pictures, but I haven't seen this one, so I don't know which side he's on. So all I can do is walk around all 4 sides, and there are 4 sides. It's what they call a quatrefoil, the French. It's like 4 cylindrical, so 4 towers. And the idea of having kind of rounded walls rather than flat walls was if you shot a cannonball towards it, or some kind of projectile, is with it being round, the cannonball, and with, no, he's up there, there he is. So with it being round, trouble is the light is in the complete wrong place for this. Let me just try and see if I can use this tree to shade. That should help. Right, have a little look at that. How fab is that? So it's an English longbow. It's the bow, of course, made of wood, twine, wouldn't be string, being woven shreds of fibres, so much, much stronger. And as I say, 4 arrows a minute. Usually his quiver behind him, so people can make arrows. And various arrows have very different heads, and they changed over time. So as armour came in, these armour-piercing arrows. But generally speaking, an arrow will move very, very quickly indeed, and it really is able to penetrate many layers of kind of clothing. They really were very, very dangerous, deadly. And you need to be especially accurate, because, as I say, it's the ability to fire a volley of arrows meant that, of course, you then have lots and lots of arrows falling in front of you, around you. If, of course, you had horses, the horse would immediately panic, possibly a horse would be hit. So what the archers did was they created panic. You couldn't possibly be aware of, or be in a position whereby you could avoid the danger. There he is, that's a good view, isn't it? So they really did kind of operate in such a way as to create mayhem and terror on the battlefield, which is absolutely fabulous, if that's what you're kind of trying to do. So we are coming into now our final site. It'll take about 2 or 3 minutes, I think, together. And that's at Middleton's Hotel, fabulous Middleton's Hotel, which hopefully we'll get to visit on York Unlocked next week. I do hope you've enjoyed this tour. I've certainly enjoyed being to you. Certainly very, very different, I think, to being in the gardens where everything is concentrated and we can get up close. But I think that it really works sort of both ways. That the ghost in the garden, the ghost in the city, it gives a kind of coherence, because obviously our history isn't just concentrated in the gardens, it's everywhere you look. So for me, it's appropriate that they are placed such. I think it could be good to do a bit more of a kind of guide for visitors to the city. Actually, this is where to go and what to see, rather than simply a list of places. They're not easy to spot. It'd be lovely to be able to find one or two that so far have eluded me, but that's okay. I don't mind that too much. But I think, you know, if you're here and you come to visit, you know, checklist, you want to sort of see them all, don't you? So I think that'd be fun to be able to just add that to it. You know, if you give up, here's a kind of clue to where you might find them, that sort of thing. Make it a little bit more interactive, maybe an app or some such thing to make it easier, or put it on Google Maps or something. So I think that'd be fun. But other than that, I've nothing but praise for this installation. I think it's absolutely amazing. You know, Frank English pig dogs, absolutely. It's all that, yeah, Monty Python Holy Grail at the top of the castle. Exactly that look and feel. So we need to cross the river for our final location. We are in the Castle Gardens, the River Ouse, pleasure boats crossing to our right hand side. We're going to go over Skeldergate Bridge, back up Skeldergate, and arrive at Middleton's Hotel. And it's be about 3 minutes, I think, from here. And that is our last installation. And then when we've reached there, I've brought you across the 2 tours all 14 locations of 2023 installation of the Ghost in the Gardens. Even though I haven't showed you 1 or 2, I've missed. I appreciate that. I've done my level best to cover all those off for you across 2 tours. So hopefully you can watch those back if you haven't watched the first tour. Do give me a like, give me a follow on YouTube, and look for that. It's called The Ghosts in the Gardens. I think it's going to be called The Ghost in the Gardens, The Ghost in the City, Part 2. So the 2 together will hopefully make for an enjoyable way to spend an hour or so in each other's company. I do hope you enjoyed it, and look forward to bringing it to you again next year, hopefully with some brand new installations. Who knows? But I may do this tour again. But there was questions now about with leaving this on YouTube, whether there's value in doing things a second time. But I'll have a think about that. I may well come and visit again before they go. Maybe do a farewell best of. Maybe one last time to try and find the squirrel. But I think we're going to see the cat. I think I've now remembered where the cat is likely to be. If it's there, it's certainly well worth seeing. So any cat lovers on, hang on in with me for a few more minutes, and we will scratch the little kitty itch. And been a grand adventure. Thank you, Tish. I'm glad you've enjoyed it. We are nearing the end of today's adventure. I'm certainly feeling it in my legs. I've walked a good distance today, but that's all right. It keeps me something like in shape. Crossing over now the mighty River Ouse, of course. So we've crossed the river twice now in today's tour, backwards and forwards, in bringing you this fabulous art installation. So just kind of finishing, just let me know, for those that have just seen today, what's your favourite today? For those that have seen both tours, what's been your favourite of all? Give me some kind of reminder. Last week we saw, of course, what we've not seen today. We saw last week, we saw the bride and the groom, the jilted bride. We had, of course, the Archbishop, who we've not seen today. We had various ones. I'm sure you can kind of remember better than I can. So it'd be interesting to know which were your. Thank you, Elizabeth. I will sleep well tonight. Which are the highlights for you of Ghosts in the Garden 2023? So we can feed that. The Peacock was certainly something to conjure with us. Cynthia. I know Cynthia did both and did some lovely photos for us on Facebook, which is always lovely to see. Your impressions, what you capture Obviously, I'm doing my best to try and create visual interest where it exists, but it always interests me to see what you've then captured and taken from it and presented, because obviously, again, what you're doing is cutting out the bits in between. So going back to our thinking about the bits in between, which is kind of what the ghost is about to me, is when you present your 20, 30, 40 sometimes photographs, what you're taking is the highlights and sort of editing out the bits in between, which I find fascinating, is what are the bits that have caught your eyes, and do they differ from the way that I visually conceived the tour. So it's like you're giving me a review, without necessarily giving it a score, you're showing me the bits that caught your interest, your attention, and so that to me is very valuable, very interesting. So thank you for doing that. The man and woman in front of a mansion, oh yeah, they were good, yeah. The judge we saw, of course, today, he was very good, not seen him before, with his gavel. Looks like he was about to send somebody away for a very long period of time. Probably wanted his tea, his lunch, and was grumpy. Enjoyed him. Dick Turpin, his horse, of course. Of course, the two monks we really enjoyed last week, didn't we? The two monks that were conversing, albeit silently, in the gardens. They used to be really sharing their kind of thought with the artists, the kneeling knight. So we really have kind of covered a very significant number of these statues. I'm not quite sure how many we've done, but I think of the 39, I've probably showed you 35, 36, somewhere in that region, or will have done by the time we do. I think there's two here, so not entirely sure who's here or what's here, but there's a Roman we haven't found yet. So I don't know if the Roman is here or not. That's kind of been looking out for, the Roman centurion. But I don't know what's here, but I know that something is here, and we're about to find out what it is that is here. And again, this is one of the buildings that I'm hoping may be available to us for York Unlocked next weekend. So we see. Right, okay. Let us see what we can see. And the first thing we can see is that in these wonderful gardens we have what appears to be, well, let's see what it appears to be. It appears to be, well, certainly a lady. She's female. Let's have a look. What is she doing? So she's wearing a hat. She's got a simple bow about her neck. She's wearing like a frock. Now then, is this a clue here? Yes, I think we've got a nurse here. It's a rather large syringe. And a kidney bowl, isn't it? About those things. Yeah, I think we've got a nurse. So we've got the kind of curling. So the hairdresser nurse. That's right. So we've got a nurse here. And chain pot. Yes, of course, that was an interesting one. So yeah, now that at various times, Lady Anne Middleton, who of course was a wonderful benefactor, this was about looking after the poor in her history. So Lady Anne. So this idea of nursing and looking after others, the care for the sick, the elderly, looking at almshouses on this side, very kind of cute, very small, but providing accommodation for the poor. So I think what we're being shown here is a reminder of nursing, about care, social care, and of course York grand history of philanthropism, the wealth of the Quakers, the Rowntrees, of course, made their focus about the standards of the urban poor. It's definitely a kidney bowl, that. So yeah, it's definitely for the nasties. So I'm not quite sure what you do with it, a catheter type thing, I don't know, whatever. 40s Warners, quite possibly, I'm not quite sure what the era is. I don't think that's a hair. I couldn't understand why we tell about it, but is that her hair? Or is it a headdress, the curls? Because if that's a hair, then yeah, it's definitely a sort of 40s wartime look. I'm not sure if it's a hair or a dress. It is some hypodermic, isn't it, that? So, not quite sure what era, but I'm guessing, yeah, certainly 20th century, I would think. I think you're probably on point there, Dawn, with the 1940s kind of reference, but so there we are. So we're just a little bit over time, so I think there's just one more over here, if I'm right remembering, that we saw last year. In fact, last year on part 2 till we started here. And if it's there again, in the same place, I think I've sort of remembered where the famous cat sculpture is. And I hope it's still here because it is absolutely wonderful. If not, then you've seen your final ghost in the garden. If not, then we have one more. Oh, actually, there's another one here I hadn't seen before. I don't remember seeing before. And that looks to be, is it a heron? A flamingo? What is this creature? Yeah. What kind of animal is that? Is it a heron with a fish in its mouth. The feathers are somewhat straggly. I'm not entirely sure what that is. It is a. It doesn't. Anyway, it is a very interesting looking bird. A heron. Yeah, I'm just not quite sure what the sort of scaly feathers. Normally they're sort of quite smooth in profile, like the heron. So I'm not sure what it is. Now last year, around here somewhere, there was a pussycat that was kind of reaching into the water to do a spot of fishing, as you might say. Its paw in there, ready to fish out what could be a pelican, but it hasn't got the distinctive sort of jowly sort of cup thing underneath its beak, as it's, I think, a heron. Could be a flamingo, but I can't think why you'd have a flamingo with a fish in a pond in York. But who knows? It may well be that's what it is. I can't see the cat this year, so maybe the heron has taken the place of the cat. Well, I thought the knees backwards. Heron pterodactyl. It's certainly an interesting sculpture. I couldn't say with any great confidence what it is, but we're going to say heron. So listen, I've got a notification I'm on less than 10% of my battery, which means that any given time I could cut out. So before I so rudely cut out, it's not that it's heron. Okay, cats on a wall somewhere. Yeah, well, I'll just have to. I'll find off social media where they are. So there we go, guys. I do hope you've enjoyed your time with me this afternoon, and last week as well. I think they're kind of two of a perfect pair, as you might say. Heron's eating a cat, quite possibly indeed. It was a great cat. It was all reaching down, but it was really kind of, you know, sometimes artists really capture the sort of feline movement and kind of presence. So that was kind of what that was. So I'll look out. There's a couple that I say we've not yet found. So I may well just do a last kind of a farewell tour next month in the gardens to kind of pull that together and to find the ones we've not seen before, so that we can say we've seen all of them. But until such time, I do thank you for spending time in York, for supporting me in the work that I do. Obviously, I enjoy it. It's not all I do other things as well. But obviously, it does take time and effort and preparation and so forth. So any support you can give towards that is most gratefully received. And of course, Humphrey thanks you from the bottom of his bowl as well. So he gets lots of lovely treats. So it's not just for me, it's for the boy as well. So thank you for everybody that supports in that way. So thank you once again for joining me here in York for the second of two tours that goes to the gardens. If you haven't already, do go on my YouTube channel, All Points North with John, to find the first part of this tour, and you can enjoy that. So thank you once again. It's been absolutely delightful to spend time with you again in York, and I look forward to seeing you next weekend. We'll be doing York on a lot. I'm not quite sure yet which buildings we're going to be into, but you can guarantee it'll be interesting. So hope to see you then. Thank you from York, and goodbye.